Broadcasting live in Tempe, Arizona, you are tuning in to the Culture Crush Business Podcast with Kendra Maples. We are here to highlight great companies and great resources for improving company culture.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with a good company culture. We do a deep dive into companies that are crushing it with a great company culture, and we bring in resources that are out there to help provide some growth to companies so that they can have a thriving culture. Now, before we get started and I introduce our two lovely gentlemen that are connected to Des Moines, Iowa, I know you're ready to chat about that.
Right.
Before we jump into that, I do want to thank our sponsor. Gateway Bank is a community bank in Arizona that specializes in serving small businesses across the valley and the country. We are so thankful to have them as a sponsor. When you work with Gateway, you don't have to call a 1-800 number for support or submit a loan application and then wait for months for an answer. You get fast, personal service from the team who really knows you and cares about you as a person. So whether you need loan or banking services for your business, Gateway Bank is there to help. So visit gcbaz.com and then /Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Bank President James Christensen, who is just an awesome rock star CEO. He'll probably have on Converse shoes when you have that conversation. So be ready for that.
Probably will.
Now, let's jump into our guests today. Right before we came on, they found another piece that connects them, which I didn't even know. So our guests today in studio, we have J.W. Rayhans. He is the president and financial advisor of Rayhans Financial, as well as the president of Joshua Development. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Kendra.
We're going to dive into all of those pieces. And then virtually coming in from Des Moines, we have Stephen Smith, the VP of People Analytics with Rework. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, thank you.
I am so stoked to have both of you on. I mentioned that I've had just beautiful, really in-depth conversations with both of you. And now I get to bring both of you together. You haven't met before. And right before we went on air, already there was a commonality with you guys and this connection with Des Moines.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, that's where you are. But JW, you said that's where you're from?
Yeah, I grew up in North Iowa, which is just a couple hours north of Des Moines. And so anytime I meet someone from Iowa, I know that there's going to be a good connection. There'll be plenty of things that we can either talk about or make fun of,
Yes.
Which that probably all wraps into culture too.
I love this. Yeah. We're talking about culture and creating besties all in one episode together.
Mm-hmm.
So before we dive too much into Des Moines and culture and all of that, I do want to just really hear a little bit about each of you first. So, Stephen, I'm going to start with you since you're coming in virtually. I want to hear just about you, what you're doing in Des Moines. I know mom's out there too with you. We've chatted about your mom, my mom. We've had this chat. So tell us about you and the work that you're doing with culture and with Rework.
Sure, yeah. When we get into culture, I'm going to talk about self-disclosure and keeping each other accountable. There's no S at the end of Des Moines. It's Des Moines. No S's in those.
Did I put an S?
Yeah.
Oh, everybody in the room is nodding right now. Am I the
I want to
only
make sure
one
that we're starting off in safe space and we can talk to each other and pick the food out of each other's teeth.
Guys,
That's right.
That's where my grandparents, the whole family is from there. My Nana is probably like rolling over in her grave right now.
Yeah, it's kind of just
the good news is, Kendra, you didn't say Des Moines.
Oh,
so you didn't double up.
You were getting there. You were getting there.
Des Moines. Oh my goodness! I'm glad we're starting in a safe space here.
That's right. We are.
Good baseline. So 10,000 foot view. I was raised in a military family, so kind of moved everywhere growing up, which was really impactful for me, understanding cultures in not a corporate climate, of course, just kind of moving around and seeing different environments. Went to school in Louisiana for industrial organizational psychology, which is kind of halfway understanding how people work, and then half statistics. No one believes you if you don't have the data to support it, doesn't seem like, for good reason. Got my first job in Des Moines, Iowa, which is why I live here now. Did that for a few years and got out of the corporate game to be a part of a company called Rework. Rework is essentially an organizational MRI. We assess an organization with multiple facets, including culture, to really understand holistic solutions. So here I kind of run our analytics program. I help with product development and certainly our strategy side. And we've been doing this for about 10 years now and growing and having fun and getting to meet cool people like y'all. So all aces here.
Awesome. And when you say holistic solutions, when you're looking at culture and you're looking at all of the components and the pieces and you're finding the data and the metrics that go along with it, which I love that we can do that, right? Culture, I feel like in the past was very gray and fluffy and you couldn't always put data and metrics around it. And now we can, right? But when you are doing this and you're talking about these holistic solutions, what does that mean?
So in the corporate gig, I started off like every other IO psych. I started in HR, right? You do HR analytics and you have engagement surveys and things like that. And then, oddly enough, I got switched to real estate because they wanted to build a new campus and we wanted some people analytics involved, which is super cool. And then I started to realize it was a very different world and that there was conflicting interests and that there was conflicting surveys and assessments and tools and indicators. And at the end of the day, everybody had a solution that they're bringing to the top of the house. And the top of the house has to make some judgment on which one of these surveys do I listen to? Which one of these things do I prioritize? Because we weren't playing from the same sheet of music, so to speak. So, you know, when I saw those silos in real time as a young professional, it really gave me the idea of why are these systems not talking to each other? You know, before we got on this call, we were talking about, you know, which we will, I'm sure, vibe. And if I think about my Louisiana days, it's all about jazz music, right? How do we play from not only the same sheet of music, but in the same rhythm with each other? And I don't think a lot of solutions do that. I'm not meaning like a vendor, but I don't think our businesses are great about being very fluid and holistic. We have our own cultures, we have our own leadership, we have our own strategies, and oftentimes they don't work well together, and it kind of gunks up the whole machine. So culture doesn't belong to HR. It's not just the workplace, which is a different workplace than it was 5 years ago. It's kind of everything at once. And if we're not fluid, we're not going to play a very good song, I guess. So yeah, that kind of thing.
I am glad that you already started to put these thoughts in of culture being a rhythm and not falling under HR and these pieces, because we are going to dive into that, JW, especially with how you started and building your company, which then led to another company. A lot of that was from the culture, right?
Yeah.
So before we jump too far into that, JW, I want to hear a little bit about you, how you got started, and then how your second company started too.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity and really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have together. As far as just from me personally, I did not grow up in a military family, but if you saw how often we moved, you'd probably think we were. And so I grew up in construction and farming, and things were difficult many times. I mean, when I went to 3 different elementary schools, 2 different junior highs, and 3 different high schools. And so that's why I say, I mean, it might look like we're a military family, but that wasn't the case. We did grow up knowing what it meant to work hard, and we grew up knowing what it meant. Some of this was small town, but we knew what it meant to, you know, be a person of your word, if you will. And that when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it and follow through. And, you know, for any of us, I think some of those ways that we grow up, they do start to influence the way we live out our lives. And so for me, what that meant was it led me to want to start and own my own business right away. And so I actually started our first company, Ray Hans Financial, when I was still in my final semester of college. And it was primarily because I wanted to be in a position where we could truly help people. And also, you know, I saw a situation where my dad worked for many different companies, and in construction, especially back then, you know, when there was work, they hired a bunch of people on, and when there wasn't work, they laid everybody off. And so I never wanted to be, I guess, you know, controlled by a bigger organization and saying, you know, here's when you can be a part of what we're doing, and here's when you're not. And so that led me to start my own company. But as far as how that progression worked, it led to really wanting to help people create and live the lifestyle that they want.
Mhm.
And so in many ways, the culture that we create, I think, has a lot to do with our values. And so most of my perspective is probably going to come from a small business owner, right? And so not even having an HR department, Stephen. So
God bless you, man. Keep it that way as long as you can.
Yeah, and many years of being in business and not having an HR department, and really understanding, what does it mean to create the right environment for people to be able to thrive and strive and grow and strengthen. But having the opportunity to be a part of larger organizations through serving on boards. And that's where, when you mentioned the second company, Joshua Development, that's where that opportunity came from. Was I've been fortunate to do many things earlier in life than a lot of people. And one of them was serving on boards and getting to chair a board at an early age, and having other executives ask me to help with their leadership teams. And that led to really performance training for executives.
Mhm.
And so that's where the two companies come from. That's a little bit of background, but I know we'll get into a lot of other things when it comes to culture, environment, performance, values, what it means to be a part of a vision and a mission, and really create that and inspire a team around it.
Yeah. So let's get into it. I want to start with, and Stephen, you kind of started to hint at it, with culture being a rhythm, almost like music. I love the jazz example, especially because jazz might have an outline and then they're going to go in unique directions, right? And so when it comes to culture, as we kind of start and open up this conversation, what in the world is culture? What is it? I know that I say many times that there is a culture whenever you put multiple people into a room. There's a culture. There's a culture with a team. There's a culture with a company. There's a culture with your family. People are getting ready to go have family holiday dinners, and they're all going to be different because of the people that are in that space. So culture is different depending on who you put in that space. But what is it?
Mhm.
So I'll throw it to either one of you just to kind of kick us off in this conversation of what is culture?
JW, you want to rock, paper, scissors? Who goes first?
I tell you what, you go
Which
ahead.
Iowa
You
boy
go. I
goes
know.
first?
You go ahead and go first, Stephen, and then I'll jump in here and there. But yeah, I'll let you lead.
Well, obviously, such a tough answer. So many definitions out there, right, to those things. I think the family situation's important to say. I don't believe companies are truly families. I think they can be very close teammates and do anything for each other.
Mhm.
But they both share a lot of similarities. I think the house you go to on Christmas changes the culture of that meal, right? If you're doing it at one fiance's house versus your grandma's house, that's going to change things. So space matters.
Yes.
The people that are there matters because they have different behaviors, right? They act differently. And if you're on Old Aunt and Edna, probably the conversations and the culture is going to be a little bit different this time than if it was just, Friendsgiving or Friendsmas like I'm going to have this year.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I think the underlying basis of it all, not the artifacts, is that, the unwritten rules, the norms, the implicit assumptions and values that JW was mentioning. And those are the things that permeate in those, artifacts and those behaviors and things. But I think it's more about those implicit norms that kind of rule the group. And how to understand that and measure that, we can go on with. But JW, slam dunk me.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the things that you shared there. In fact, I might even say similar things, and maybe I'll just share them in a little bit different way. But when I first think of culture, I think of environment and chemistry.
Mm.
And so when it comes to environment and chemistry, and granted, I'm a lot of times I'm coming from, a sports background and building teams, and similar to what Stephen mentioned, it's common for people to even describe the culture that we have at Ray Hans Financial and Joshua Development as a family. There's like this family feel. There's this family sense
Mhm.
to our culture. And my thought on that is it's a different dynamics than say a family, but it can have a family feel where, like Stephen, where you mentioned the bond, right? The bond that people feel when they're in that environment, that can have a family feel to it. But we often almost simultaneously refer to ourselves as a team because, you know, the team dynamics is going to change based on different people in the room. So I guess if I'm trying to describe culture, I think of three things, and I'm going to basically kind of put it around kind of a business mindset, if you will. I think of three things. I think of there's a pursuit that's happening, right? So you've got this environment of there's a pursuit that's happening. There are people involved, and as the people change, the culture, the feel, the chemistry needs to change. It will change, and then there's a set of values that everyone kind of agrees to live by. And so you've got this pursuit, and you have the people that are involved, and then you have a set of values that everyone agrees that's kind of who we are and what we're all about. And then from there, you've got these different feels of what the culture is, depending on how all of that is lived out on a daily basis with the people that are involved, with the team that's involved, and whatever the organization does or what they're about.
JW, you said sports, which obviously, you know, perked my ears. What are your background in sports? What do you like? What do you rely on? What are your analogies about?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. So I pretty much grew up playing basketball and baseball. Basketball has always been my love. God blessed me with a 5'8" structure and frame, so it didn't lend me into the NBA. And I was a pitcher in baseball too, believe it or not. And there's not that's another one that has to do with height. So apparently from an early age, I thought I was going to be tall, and then that didn't happen. But that's okay. It was an outstanding experience. Got to be competitive at a number of different levels, and so that's where a lot of it comes from. I absolutely love coaching basketball and have for a number of years. Literally from the year after I stopped playing till today, I've coached youth basketball, always in a volunteer capacity, for a long time now. Well, so that's mine.
As I think of my three favorite books on culture, you know, one of them is what is it? 6 Rings by Phil Jackson. Is it 6 Rings?
11 Rings.
11 Rings. Geez.
11 Rings. Yeah.
That's the first go about it. But yeah, maintaining that culture, which changed, to your point, with those two different teams and two very different leaders and two different kind of point guards. And, you know, how do you maintain different but still high performing cultures based on the players that you have was really interesting to me. So as you're talking about, I didn't know we were going to go into sports. That's a really cool, or like hockey, right? I'm not a big hockey guy, but, you know, you have all these lines, and yeah, the teams on the ice will change a little bit, but you have that overarching framework that creates that culture. So as you're talking about kind of changing players in and out, I catch your background in the basketball scene.
Yeah, well, and that's you mentioned a great book too. Obviously, Phil Jackson, Hall of Fame, legendary coach, more championship rings with 2 different teams, and it reminds me of leadership. You know, when it comes to culture, I don't know that we can talk about culture without talking about leadership, because leadership is really going to drive, you know, what that culture looks like. And even, you know, one of the things that Phil Jackson mentions in that book of 11 Rings, one of his key principles was to focus on the spirit, not the scoreboard. And he really was diligent and purposeful about focusing on the spirit of the team as opposed to the outcome of the games. And his belief was that if you focused on the spirit of the team, you'd know how to lead that team towards championships. And if you get a good sense of that spirit, then you also knew how to coach individual players to be a part of the overall chemistry of a championship level team.
Yeah, when Kendra mentioned, you know, the Jazz, you have it goes back to freedom within a framework to me. And if I think about culture, it has to be that. And to your point, like you talked about, like the fundamentals of the triangle was set. But once you understood the fundamentals, he allowed and encouraged that kind of spontaneity off of those fundamentals, the autonomy to grow and to change things up and to, you know, play with what they're, being able to take that spirit and allow that autonomy and flexibility based off of those fundamentals are huge, right?
Yeah, that's why his triangle offense worked, is because it allowed the players to move with the game, but within a framework. You know, you've mentioned jazz a couple of times. We're going to have all kinds of fun with this conversation. I can already tell. So, Stephen, did you play any instruments? Like, is jazz something that you've been a part of playing, or a jazz band or anything?
Not a jazz band. I'm a piano guy, but, you know, did a lot of time in Louisiana, still call Louisiana home. So when we think about culture, for me, that's obviously something where New Orleans and New York, you always know where you're at when you're in one of those two cities. So no, not a jazz band, but a lot of jazz in my background. Yeah.
Yeah.
You?
I have a dream of playing saxophone someday. I played trumpet when I was a kid, but always wanted to play saxophone. And there's just something about the sound of a saxophone that just fits, and that's what jazz is to me. And I think it's outstanding that we're talking about rhythm in the same conversation with culture, because there is a rhythm to culture, and there's also, even when I think about the improvisation that takes place in just, when when you're with a talented jazz band or jazz player, when you can just tell they're improving, and yet they're right on with every single person in that band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it ties back into the sports thing,
Mhm.
because all of those components factor into the culture, whether it's jazz, whether it's sports, whether it's a company. JW, you said earlier, right? The pursuit and the goal, right? If they know this is the ending goal, right? But then as we were talking about the book, you were talking about the spirit and not the scoreboard. So yes, they have a goal, but maybe the path that they take there is not a straight line. They get to improv a little bit, and all of those pieces factoring into the culture. And so with that, I want to dive into a component of that, and it's the people piece, right? I've worked with a handful of companies that we'll be talking and they're like, I just continue to hire shitheads. I just continue to hire the wrong people. And it's like, well, are they really the wrong people, or are they just not the right fit for this culture? You're talking about not being the size, the figure for some of these sports, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a musician. I think I played the recorder for about 15 minutes and was
Third
over
grade,
it.
yeah.
In third grade, and knew that was the extent of my musical career, right? And so the people in the right places and fitting the right culture is such a huge piece. How do you do that? How do you identify that somebody is the right fit for your culture? How do you also accept if they're not? And maybe when you're hiring, right, both of you, when you're hiring, maybe they said all the right things in the beginning and now they're there and you're like, ooh, maybe they're not the right fit. How do you identify and build your culture with the right people in the right seats? And then, like I said, how do you accept that maybe they're not the right fit? And then what do you do next?
Well, I think the first thing I heard was, how do I know someone's right for me? And like all things, like you need to know thyself first. And sometimes if we don't, we all think and feel so strongly, and that's a good thing, that we know what we know and we feel what we feel, but there are things that we don't know that we don't know. So until I know what my soil is, I don't know what flowers are going to do well in it or not. I mean, I'd love to say once we know what we're working with, then we can hire and develop. We can make this team work. But we also need to understand that we can't be everybody, everything to everybody, right? So before I even go about the conversation of how do I know someone's a good fit for my culture, most people aren't truly measuring, understanding what their culture is. They're kind of just feeling it, and if I ask 10 of them, they'd all have 10 different opinions, and that's a unstable ground to start planting in. So before I even get to the is a person a good fit, do we know ourselves first? And if not, we need to go check, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For us, I'll share with you that we've always felt like team fit is just as important as skill set. And so we're a size organization where we can do some things that larger organizations probably simply can't do, just because, part of our application process, part of our interviewing process is that applicant, if they're coming to the final stages, they'll do a team interview without me involved. So they'll go in, they'll meet with the whole team. they'll have a conversation. They can have an open dialogue. Our team knows they can ask whatever they want without my influence. And that person knows that they can ask our team anything they want without my influence. And that's just a part of our process when we're looking for the people that we believe are going to be the best fit. Doesn't mean we're going to get it right every single time, but it certainly helps when you've got that other input, because part of that comes from the fact, if I go back to values, our team is really, really clear on what our values are and what behaviors. So we literally have a definition. We have a clear definition of our vision, our mission, our values, and behaviors. And that's literally, I mean, we do a weekly team meeting. If we get into really talking about like, how do you keep a culture strong and really keep your pulse on the spirit of your team and things like that, it's because we put that stuff repetitively in front of our team on a regular basis. And we do a weekly team meeting every Monday afternoon. And in the packet for that meeting, the preparation, there's our values, our mission, vision, values, and behaviors is the first 2 pages every single week. And then the agenda or outline for the meeting is on page 3. And so when we look at like fit and hiring and interviewing, it's because we're clear about who we are and what we're looking for. And Stephen, I so appreciate that you mentioned that we can't be all things to all people, or we can't necessarily, say that, yes, everyone is invited to be a part of our organization, because there are going to be people that simply aren't to be a part of the organization. There's another organization out there that they're the right fit for, they're the right person for. And the other thing that I would include in that is, I think you alluded to this a little bit, Stephen, is with regard to like position, like what's the job that we're expecting them to do? Because yeah, they've got to have the skill set for that. So that, but to me, skill set's like the minimum requirement. It's just, okay, you've shown that you have the skills to do the job. Now let's see if you're really going to be and feel included and important and valuable in a team like ours. And so that's where we go when it comes to the right person.
Yeah. And I feel like it goes back to the sports thing, right? Is, are you the right fit for that culture? And then also the skill set piece of, okay, can you actually be the quarterback? Can you actually be the pitcher? There's that component of it too. And then like you said, JW, you don't have to be the fit for everybody. And Stephen, you said that too. Every company is going to be a little bit different. The type of company you're in, the industry you're in, the financial side that you're in, right? I had a conversation with a gentleman the other day. When I asked him what he did, he was very hesitant to tell me that he was in the financial space. And he said, well, I don't really like leading with this because it's an industry that, not everyone's really a big fan of. And I said, well, that's not true. I know people that are in that industry and they encompass it from a very heartfelt perspective, right? And so I'm thinking, right, industries are all different and they're going to have their own piece, their own little style of culture. On this, I think this is actually, as I'm rambling a little bit here, I think this is a good part. I do want to do a quick little blurb with our sponsor. And the reason why is because we're talking about culture fit. We're talking about industry fit. We're talking about who's the fit for your team. And I said something about James Christensen wearing Converse, and you agreed. Do you know him as well?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
He's an outstanding guy and leads a great organization at Gateway Bank.
Yeah. So again, another culture that, maybe there's this industry, but he has built this team in such a unique and beautiful way that is everybody the right fit for his team? No. But he has built a beautiful team. So with that tangent of mine, we'll hear a little bit from the sponsor and then we'll jump back into this.
Great.
Remember when your banker knew you and cared about you? This experience still exists at Gateway Bank, the only community bank in Mesa, Arizona, serving customers Valley and nationwide. With Gateway, you get the fast personal service of a small bank with the convenience, security, and stability of a large one. Whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, they're here for you. Visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Gateway President James Christensen.
Okay, so how we were talking about, industries and fit and culture and not being the right fit for everybody. I want to dive in a little bit on this, JW, with you and the financial work that you do.
Hmm.
One of the really beautiful things that you do when we talked about this, you're doing your intro meeting with somebody
Sure.
and you don't even talk about the financial piece until the very, very end.
You got it.
You're digging into them, who
Mhm.
they are, what their goals are, what makes them happy in life.
Mhm.
And that, we talked about leadership earlier, right?
Mhm.
That is culture. That's knowing your people. That's knowing what makes people happy. Why do they have this job to get
Mhm.
paid? What are they going to do with their money? And so I want to tap into what you do a little bit because I know that's going to bleed into this conversation beautifully about leadership and culture.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to. So first, let me give you the standard disclosure right up front. Anytime we start talking about money or
Yes.
finances or investments, right? And so for any of you that are listening, just realize that we're having a conversation and there's no way for me to know your personal situation. So if any
Yes.
money topic comes up, please don't, figure that as advice to you that are listening right now. But it does give us an opportunity to talk about culture because in the financial business, I mean, part of why we feel we exist is to actually help the industry be viewed as a profession that can be trusted.
Mhm.
And so for a lot of people, the topic of money is a difficult one to have. And so interestingly enough, it's going to sound paradoxical, but the main reason that I wanted to start a financial planning and investment firm was to help people realize that money's not the real thing they want.
Mhm.
That there's all these other things in their life that are so much more important to them than the money or than the finances or than the investment. And so you're right, in that very initial conversation that we have with anyone before they're ever a client, we really utilize the opportunity to have a conversation about what's important to them. What do they value in life? And through that, we will really spend about half of the conversation just on that alone. And not just the surface answers as they come in, but then asking more about that. Okay, well, why is that important? When you hear the things like stability and comfort and peace of mind and less stress and family, and okay, why is your family important to you?
Mhm.
Like, when was the last time somebody actually asked you, why is your family important to you? And then sat there and listened to the answer. Why is it important to be comfortable? And then somebody sat and listened to the answer.
Mhm.
And so that leads us into then, okay, well, what are we going to focus on? And so that's where the goals come in. And we have a very specific way that we go about helping get real good, strong clarity on someone's goals, to the point of which we know their subconscious is going to already start working on, like, how do I make that happen? Okay. Because by the time we're done with that conversation, they're already seeing it as if it's become real.
Mhm.
And so then with the last 5 minutes or so of our conversation, we'll go, okay, kind of help me understand where you're at today in financial terms. Like, just give me the high level. And then, yeah, as their follow-up after that, absolutely. But the reasoning behind all that, and this is where it ties back to culture, is because if everyone on our team is trained that way, guess what types of conversations they're having when even, a client just calls in and has a random question? They're asking about, oh, how is your family?
Mhm.
Are you feeling comfortable? What's your stress level been like? It's the holidays. Are you doing okay? And so it's more of those kinds of conversations that's really just, it flows through the whole culture of our organization to create what everybody strives for, is having a great client experience. I believe great client experience starts with the people in your organization.
Mhm.
And if you can create a great experience for them, if you can create a great environment for them, if you can create a great culture for the people within your organization, guess what? They're going to deliver an exceptional client experience. And
Yeah.
so, is that kind of what you were looking for? Is
It's
like,
it's
it's the
exactly.
finance. I mean, we utilize it in the financial business, but it could be utilized in any business.
It could be utilized in any business, any conversation, really.
Mhm.
I mean, it allows people to have more in-depth, connected conversations.
Mhm.
And then in this conversation of culture, right? And Steve, we talked about leadership a little bit in the beginning. if you have a leader that is asking those kinds of questions, not even your financial person asking those questions, but if you have a leader that's asking those kinds of questions, you're getting to know your people at a deeper level. And then in terms of big picture culture of a team, now you have that connection with your team. You know them beyond just, oh, Kendra has a dog and a mom. You know deeper. You know why I do the things that I do. The financial piece, what makes me happy, right? What things do I love doing? If you can have those conversations with your team and then you're that much deeper with them, then in the terms of culture, right? If something happens and you start to see that maybe somebody's not delivering at the top capacity that they were before, well, instead of just jumping to, well, you're not reporting, right? You're not doing your sales like you were. It allows you as a leader to ask the questions deeper of really what's happening. And so that's why I really wanted you to tell us a little bit about how you guys approach that, because in culture and leadership and just working with people, and Stephen, I'm sure you're seeing this with the companies that you're working with, or trying to influence this with the companies that you're working with, right? When you're talking with them, when you're doing an analysis on their company, and it's tying back to the leadership component and the connection piece. And do they feel like that is a safe space, like this conversation and how we started?
Iowa, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm almost. Steven, can I ask you a question? Because here's something I'm really curious about is, we're talking about this word connection. What are some of the things that either you do in your own organization or with the organizations that you work with to keep the connection amongst the team members strong, or the employees strong? Whatever word an organization uses for their team members or their employees or family, whatever that word they use, what are you noticing helps keep that connection strong between the people and the leadership? Right.
Where I got it from, there was a quote back in the day, there's 4 ways to build good friendships and relationships. And the first one's proximity. And I think today's day and age, we're seeing hybrid. Half my company's in the Netherlands and half of us here in the States. So proximity isn't always in the same office, right? Although happy to say I get to Amsterdam often, and that's fun. But that proximity matters, right? That connection point, just the time and the opportunity to connect, even if there's nothing there, because that starts to create the familiarity and the similarities between each other. You start to get into that deeper part you just mentioned, Kendra, past the surface level, Facebook questions. And then ultimately, number 4, you get to that self-disclosure where you can start to tell each other things like, drop the S on Moines and things like that. So
we started this conversation very safe today.
And so I think being purposeful and mindful about taking the time and energy and investment to keep connection and proximity, because the rest of it will naturally flow. And it's really easy as we're going so hard and your heads are down and you're running on your own tasks, and Lord knows you got another thing to do tomorrow. It's really easy to put the head down and lose some of that connection, right? So making the time and energy, man. You?
Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning each one of those, because I think this is one of the things that a lot of leaders and organizations struggle with right now. Is, you mentioned this. Some people call it a new work environment. It's probably not as new as many people think that it is, when you've got some that are hybrid workers and you have some people that are working in multiple offices. I mean, if we take things old school, it's it's not uncommon for there to be multiple sites of an organization and still have to draw a connection between all of those. And so now it might look a little different from time to time, but with many leaders that I've visited with, this is one of the areas where they're like, man, how do I just keep a strong connection with my people when some people are in, some people are out, some are working remote, some are hybrid, some are in the office on certain days, some are out of the office on other certain days. And interaction, I think, matters, especially when it comes to connection. Is, how are we creating the opportunities for interaction amongst the people on our team? because if there's regular interaction or there's consistent interaction, it gives the opportunity for them to have that bond. It gives the opportunity for them to look and see themselves beyond just the person I work with, so that they can have some of those other conversations and they can genuinely ask about their day and how things are going. And so I think about interactions when I think of connectivity. And I also think of what do leaders do to create an openness where, it's okay to think of one another beyond just the person I see at work. So what's being done to create an open environment? We do some team book studies on our team. And so there's certain things that we're studying together along the way and having dialogue and conversation about along the way. And a couple of them that we did this year, so they're fresh in my mind is, we did the study with Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. And so, she's known for talking about vulnerability and openness and being able to have rumbles or tough conversations, but do them in such a respectful and professional way that people can be direct and you can still move through a conversation well. And another one that we did at the beginning of the year was Brendan Burchard's, high performance habits. And that one where he talks about there's 6 habits. Well, there are some common things between both of those authors and both of their sets of research. One of them is clarity. Like, are we able to have clarity with one another? And clarity, I think, helps us with connection too.
It's funny you mentioned that. My other 2 favorite books on culture. One is Team of Teams, which is a military book, General Stanley McChrystal. The other one, very different about culture, is Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull, the guy who started Pixar. And the connection that both of them had in my mind as you were talking, you just made a light bulb, is that they both believe in the idea of red reports, right? Like, I'm going to make a rough draft. I'm going to create the plan for attack or whatever it might be for the next movie. And then I want people that have nothing to do with this project to come in and beat the crap out of it. Just beat the crap out of it and find every little hole you can. And if you're not in a place where you can take that, the end outcome is almost certainly going to fail. And I think everything you said, I'm now seeing all 4 of those people be in line. So I think we got something going there.
We do.
Of the red reports. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I even appreciate you bringing up that, because how many of us, and again, going back to any of you that are listening, whether you're a leader in your organization or you're, the person that say that, is digging in every day. The thing about it is we all talk about the importance of feedback, but how many of us actually have an openness to all forms of feedback? We love getting great feedback, right? We love the compliments. It makes us feel good. It builds our confidence, and we see the value that we create when we get this positive feedback. How many of us give a similar open response when the feedback isn't as positive? And what kind of assumptions do we generally make about the other person who's giving us the feedback? I mean, what if our default initial response was, wow, they must care about me. If they're willing to tell me that, they must care about me. How would our response change? How much more would we grow? How much more open would I be to the feedback that comes in? So when you mentioned you didn't say red team.
Red reports.
Red reports. Thank you. I think of it as red team because I think in the military, they call them the red team, right? They'll develop a mission, they'll put together the mission plan, and then they'll have the red team come in, which always reminds me, one of the things that sometimes leaders get frustrated with is when people ask a lot of questions, because sometimes as leaders, we're like, I just want to share the vision and you all figure it out. But then people come back with questions. And we're like, wait a second, why are you asking all these questions? Sometimes that's exactly the purpose of the red team, is to ask tough questions and say, what does this mean? What about if this happens? What if that doesn't go exactly as planned? How are we going to adapt? And so it's almost like this isn't a direct quote from anybody in particular, but the answers are always in the questions. We've probably all heard that phrase, right? The answers are in the questions. And if you can ask great questions, then you're going to come up with great answers.
Yep. And so I was taking notes while the 2 of you are chatting about these pieces. So JW, your initial question was around the connection piece, right? So it came up about clarity, time, energy, openness. I would love to add an extra one. I feel like I'm a guest on your show right now.
It's your show, Kendra. You can say whatever you want.
It's not right now. I'm asking. I want to add another one that's consistency.
Mm.
So my background back in the day was actually in animal behavior and training. And one of the biggest pieces about working with animals, the same way about working with people, is there has to be consistency involved. You can't just go in, work with an animal, train it a couple of things, leave, and then come back a month later and assume that there's going to be a connection and that animal is going to respond again. You have to continuously work at it. And so that consistency is a piece of all of this, right? As you're talking about asking questions or giving the hard feedback, you can't just do it once, because then they really are going to go, oh, well, JW just told me I suck. And, they're going to, it's going to be taken differently than if there's consistency and these conversations are heartfelt and you're giving the positive and the, hey, also I've noticed this. Same thing, Stephen, when you're talking with your teams about the time and the energy. Again, you have to be continuous and consistent with it, especially, Stephen, with your team being remote and in different places. You can't just go out there, once a year and be like, hey, guys, I'm here in person. Let's connect, right? It's got to be consistent. Have that regular visit to see them, or those regular check-ins, I think, is another really big piece of all of this that allows these bonds and these pieces of culture to build if you're doing it over and over again, and you're not just stepping in one day like, hey, I'm going to be a really great leader today. I'm going to ask you what's important to you and how you feel, and then I'll chat with you next year on your annual check-in. Like, that piece doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, consistency is a big one.
Is there anything with the two of you on the consistency piece that you try and implement and do with your teams to kind of keep a regular basis check-in?
Well, I mean, again, back to the military thing, my pops was a pilot, and in pilot training, they always talk to him about a thing called the OODA loop, which is what he taught me at a young age and what my company uses for ourselves and for the companies we work with. And it stands for the ability to observe, orient, decide, and then act. You see something happening, you figure out what it means, you make a decision, and you go. And my dad would always tell me that the pilot that won the dogfight was not the pilot that had the fastest plane or the best bombs or even the best teammate behind him. The pilot that wins the dogfight is the one that can go through the OODA loop the most times the fastest. They can orient and be agile. And that's what I heard JW talk about a lot. So it's the same thing for us. It's if you're not having those routine, and I guess now we're circling ourselves, which is a good thing. We're coming full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Implementing an OODA loop and an actual feedback loop that is ongoing and part of the culture becomes the culture, right? And that's where the psychological safety, that's where the checkpoints that we've been talking about come in. So yeah, just creating a framework and call it an OODA loop or whatever you want to do it. But frequent practice and immediate feedback, right?
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And you said observe, orient, decide, act.
And act, yeah. Yes, ma'am. And go through it again. Learn and go through it again. Fast.
JW, what about you?
Well, now, Stephen, we're going to stay connected even after all of this, because not
You're
only
from Iowa, man.
We've talked about Iowa, we've talked about sports, we've talked about military, and now we're talking about your dad being a pilot, and we got to go into almost Top Gun at this point.
Speaking of,
man, that was my thing.
That's right. I know. If we're going back to the very beginning of introductions, so as a kid, the first thing I wanted to be was a professional basketball player. The second thing I wanted to be was a fighter pilot. And then, but the only thing is, to be an NBA basketball player, I figured out later, it's good to have height. And then to be a fighter pilot, they don't let blind guys fly planes. And so I was out on both from the beginning, so if we go back to the feedback loop, right? In a way, I guess those two stories do tie in a little bit, is all of us are on a constant feedback loop, whether we realize it or not, right? Because we're always intaking information, and then we're making decisions based on that information. Just most of the time, we don't realize that's happening as rapidly as it is. And so those feedback loops, the way that we see that happening, not just in our organizations, but even others that I've had a chance to be a part of, when you look at a board where the board seems to operate at a higher level, they seem to operate at a higher efficiency, they seem to be able to get more done. And then you might serve on another board and maybe even half the people are the same and the other half aren't, but that board just doesn't seem to operate as quickly or as fast. And so even in our own organizations, when we've got this feedback loop, it's almost one of the, call it a success habit, or one of the things that they do that allow them to work at the pace or the speed or the effectiveness is right back to what Stephen shared with us that his dad taught him, which was that constant feedback where you are observing, you are seeing what's happening and you're deciding, and then you're taking an action, and then you're learning from the action that you took to say, okay, let's observe again and let's decide again and let's take another action. And so, I mean, when we think about it, that describes business because it's constantly changing. And so as we are able to do that as a team, there's another book based off research that comes to mind. And I don't know if you've read this one or not, Stephen. It seems like we read all the same books now, but we really did not know each other before this conversation. So Kendra, you really, I know, you really know what you're doing. And my hope is that everyone listening, that you're actually getting some value out of this conversation, because I feel like it's Stephen and I talking, and we're really hoping that, something of this matters to someone who's listening.
People who like jazz.
Yeah, that's right. If you like jazz So trust factor. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Trust Factor, but trust within an organization is usually going to determine the speed at which a team can function. And so in there, they've got an assessment tool that they use that they call O Factor, and it's got, they use the acronym oxytocin, and each of the letters means something from oxytocin to determine the level of trust in an organization. But even as we're talking about this in terms of feedback and functioning and speed at which things can get accomplished, or even, a vision that's so big, like how do you get a team to believe in a vision that's bigger than what they've ever done before? Because if we go back to culture and environment for any, and Stephen, I'm getting this sense from you, but my I guess my guess or my assumption is probably similar where you're at, is you want to create an environment where people can be at their best. Like, I mean, I've just always believed that someone's going to perform at their highest level when they're doing something that they love the majority of the time, when it's within the scope of their strengths, within a skill set that they have, that they just enjoy being a part of. It's like, if you can create an environment with those four components, people are going to perform at a really high level. And then for leadership, it's just a matter of making sure that you foster that environment as often as possible. And if that means repositioning someone or changing a position or, changing up the responsibilities that someone has, then that's up to the leader to be sure that that environment is constantly in that state, or as much as possible, consistently in that state of putting people at their best.
Yeah. And JW, I think that is a beautiful way for us to start to wrap up this conversation.
Wait, we're done already?
I hate to break it to you. I feel like we could,
Stephen, let's just keep talking. I mean,
you can cut us off when they want to.
I know that this conversation that I was a guest on could go on for absolutely ever. And both of you brought beyond your A games today. Karen, our producer and owner of the studio, and Stephanie from my team that's here, they have heard me say this 1,000 times, but every one of these podcasts gets better and better and better. And you guys have set the bar very high. So I appreciate you for bringing me on as your guest today.
It's the great culture that you set.
To talk about company culture. I think that was a beautiful way to wrap this up, though, is you're creating an environment where people are their best and can be their best. And leadership is involved in that. Openness is involved in that. Connection, consistency, all of the things that we've talked about. JW, yes, there is so much in here that people are going to take away. All of the books that you guys mentioned, we will tag all of that as well. There's so much meat in this conversation, and I do want it to go on forever. Although I know that people have to get to the holidays, and pumpkin pie was my
I'm
thing.
sure they do.
I
Yeah.
talked about. So before we wrap this up and I read some final notes, I want to give both of you the moment, kind of give us whatever your final thought, your final, hoorah statement takeaway from this conversation. And then after we do those, I do want each of you to be able to tell everyone how they can reach you too. Now that you guys have your show together.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Stephen, what's your last big hoorah takeaway nugget?
I guess it's knowing thyself first, not copying somebody else. Half the companies from good to great are now bankrupt or sold or gone. So got to know yourself. And then once you do that, include people on the journey. It's not something that you're doing, but yeah, it's all inclusive.
I love that.
Yeah.
JW,
Yeah.
what about you?
Well, I mean, first, thank you. Really, I mean, truly, you're the one that helped facilitate this conversation to happen for Stephen and I to get to know each other and kind of take over the show. And so just thank you for the opportunity to just share this with your audience. And Stephen, it's been great to get to know you. Karen, Stephanie, thank you for really being behind the scenes, but really making this a production that will be valuable to others. And so with that, I guess I'd leave this thought. And if there is anyone listening that has gotten a chance to know me, they're probably going to guess on how I'll finish this out. But I really believe that it's because it kind of sums it all up, which is when you look for the good in someone, you'll find it. When you look for the good in someone, you'll find it. And so to me, and I hope for anyone out there, if you're part of an organization, you are a leader. In other words, you are a valuable participant in the culture. You help shape the culture. It's not just who gets viewed as a leader that shapes that culture. Every person in an organization shapes the culture and contributes to the culture. And so for anyone, be thinking about how do I enhance the culture of my organization, regardless of the dynamics or the politics or whatever else is trying to get in the way. Just ask yourself that personal responsibility, right? What can I do to enhance the culture around here? What can I do to help others be at their best? And when you look for the good in someone, you'll find it.
That's perfect. And as people are listening and they are so excited for all these meaty little pieces, and they're interested in following up and connecting with the two of you, Stephen, what is the best way for people to reach you?
I'm a Smith, so finding me on LinkedIn is probably impossible. To be honest with you, rework.com. You can find me there, I'm sure.
Beautiful. JW, what about you?
Similar. I would probably say it's easiest to just direct people to either the rayhansfinancial.com website or the joshuadevelopment.com website that has our contact information. It has my personal contact information. Those would probably be the easiest, simplest ways to reach out.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And before I read some parting notes, thank you genuinely again to the two of you. I am beyond excited for the conversation that we just finished and the conversations that we're going to have after this. So thank you. To everyone else, thank you for listening to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. Culture Crush Business is your hub for company culture resources. With deep cultural insights and years of expertise, we evaluate your company's needs and connect you with the precise resources to cultivate a thriving culture. Those resources could actually be these two gentlemen you heard from today. And one last thing, I do want to make sure we thank again our amazing sponsor, Gateway Bank. It has been so amazing to partner with them and with the very culture-focused CEO, James Christensen. Gateway Bank partnered with Culture Crush Business because they believe in hiring the best people and building the best company culture for them, for the people, like you said, JW, for them, so they can deliver the best experience for everyone else. So whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, Gateway is there to help. Visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Bank President James Christensen. All loans subject to approval. Member FDIC. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. Culture Crush is your hub for company culture resources. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, we want to hear from you. If you are a company that supports growing great cultures, then we want to hear from you too. Connect with us at info@culturecrushbusiness.com.